So welcome back again. In this lesson, we're going to talk about recycler reviews. And recycler reviews are actually one of the most important components of making any Android application. Pretty much any serious Android application has at least one recycler review. And because of that, this is one of those lessons that you have to really have the presence of mind and spend some time on really mastering it. If you feel like taking a break at this point and coming back to it, I would actually recommend that, because this lesson and the next lesson, actually the next few lessons, are quite important, and all of them are going to be things that they're going to stay with us until the end of this course. So in any case, let's get started with recycler reviews. And recycler reviews are basically table views in Android. Table views have advantages that I will explain to you as we go along, but the most important part of them is that, as the name suggests, they recycle their views. Simply, if you have, let's say, your social media application and you want to see a list of 10,000 people, obviously if you populate all 10,000 of them within your UI, then your UI is going to really slow down. So things such as recycler views in Android or table views in iOS, they basically recycle their views, and in that way they only have as many views as you can see, and all the other views are not there unless you scroll and they just appear on the fly. And because of that, they get to be quite performant. So let's say you have a recycler view of the list of all the cities on the planet with a picture of them. Now that, if you want to show all of them at once, obviously it's going to slow down your UI, it's going to even crash your UI. But when you use a recycler view, only a bunch of them gets shown. Let me show you a recycler view. The one that we're going to create in this lesson is basically going to be a recycler view. It's a table view with the names of so many countries, and you can just scroll between them. And the fact that only the ones that are right in front of us and within the screen are actually allocated, it makes it quite performant. When we scroll it, the ones that they go outside, they get deleted, and the new ones, they get built in here basically. So that's the goal of this lesson. At the same time, we want to make a recycler view that has the names of the countries, and for each of them it basically makes what we call a row, which is basically this little object in here. Now the rows can be heavily customized. If you open an application such as the Twitter application, each of the items or each of the stories that you find is basically a row of a recycler view that has been heavily customized to do so many different things. I'm going to show you the basics of it in this lesson. In the next lesson, I'm going to show you how you can click on one of them, and then one of the upcoming sections we're going to make far more complex recycler views. Now let's go ahead into our Android Studio. Let me hide this guy. Let's go to Android Studio. I'm going to make a new project, empty activity, and I'm going to call it recycler view application. So this is the recycler view. Let's head that up. And then once we end up in my recycler view, the very first thing that we want to be doing is we want to go to our layout and we want to make a recycler view. Now here is something that I would really want you to pay attention to it. Recycler view isn't added to your libraries by default. So you either have to go to your Gradle in here, to your build.gradle, and manually add the implementation for the recycler view, or what you could do is you could actually come to your layout and you could drag a recycler view to your layout. And as you can see, there's a little icon in here that says if you do that, it's going to actually add the project dependency for you as well. So I'm going to actually drag that in here. It's going to ask me, do you want to add the dependency? I'm going to say yes, I absolutely want to do that. And then it's going to take it a little while. If you can see at the bottom, it's saying it's adding some components. Once that is done, then it's going to be able to show us the recycler view. Now, if you go to your build.gradle, the app level, you will see that a new line has been added. It's been added as Android recycler view version 1.10. And that's, something that we could do manually, or we could do it by just dragging our recycler view to our activity. Now I have the recycler view, and recycler view is just like any other view. It has to be constrained. So I'm going to constrain it to the top, to the left, to the end, and to the bottom. And those are the ones that I need. And I'm going to call this one my recycler view, or my RV as short. Now the next thing, the big challenge in here, is how are we going to populate the items in here. Now the very first thing that I should do in here is I actually have to show what would one item look like in here. And to do that, I'm actually going to go ahead and add a new layout. So I'm going to go to my resources, layout. In here, I'm going to say right click and say give me a new layout. and the new layout resource file. I'm going to call it my row because that's going to be the row for each of the items. So let's call it the row item or anything that you want, as long as everything is lowercase letter, of course. Now we have this new layout which is completely empty, and what we want to be doing in it is we basically want to make one text view in it, that text view is going to be the name of the country. So because of that, I'm actually going to go ahead to the code, and in the code area I'm going to go ahead and say let's format everything a little bit better so I can see things easier. Now I'm going to say instead of the constraint layout at the very top, I want it to be a text view, and once I have that, I'm going to go ahead and say I don't want the value for the height of it to be matching its own parent, so I don't want it to take up the entirety of the screen. Rather, I want it to be wrapping its own content. So I'm going to go ahead and say it becomes a wrap content, so it becomes a smaller. Then what I want to be doing is I actually want to put some text into it. So I'm going to go ahead and say the text is let's say template, because we're going to find the name of the country soon enough. I want to add the text size for it. So text size, let's say I want to go to 22 sp. I want to make the gravity of it higher, basically center, so it basically goes to the center of the screen. And then maybe I want to add some padding to it. So I'm going to go ahead and say padding is going to be 20 everywhere. So basically this is my object. If you wanted, you could make it more complex. You could make add a little view at the bottom of this, so it would basically make a distinction between every two rows. But for now, I just want to get the very basics of it done so I understand what's happening. I think I did the same mistake as before. 20 dp should be the number. Now here I have this text view that doesn't have any other parents, so the only thing I need to do in here is I actually have to give it a name. So I'm going to go ahead and call it row text view. So far we have our main layout, which has got a recycler view. We have a row item that is going to be used to populate these items in here. And now we have to actually go to our main activity to start writing the actual parts of our code, which is making an adapter and a view holder for our layout basically. Now before any of those, let's think about what we want to actually show in our application. My application is meant to basically show us a bunch of items. So if that's the case, let's go ahead and say somewhere in here I have a variable. Let's call it my items or my countries. So I'm going to go in here and say variable. I'm going to say it is called my countries. Maybe that makes more sense. It's going to be an array of, or array of basically, and then array of, I have to give it the type of it. I'm going to say it is of the type a string. And then once we have that, we actually have to populate it. So I'm going to populate it with a bunch of countries. So I'm going to go ahead in my onCreate, and I'm going to say my countries becomes array of, and let's put a bunch of names in here. So I'm going to say Canada, I'm going to say US, I'm going to say Mexico, I'm going to say Cuba. I'm trying to think of, when we go from north towards the south in here, what are the countries. I think Jamaica is the next one, then I think is Guatemala, then I think there is a country called Honduras. I think that's basically the extent of my understanding of geography. So let's say the next one is Spain. I know it has nothing to do with that. What I could do is I actually could duplicate this a few times, so we get a lot of countries, but the technique of it is going to be working, but the meaning of it is kind of doesn't really matter for us right now. So basically we have an array of so many countries. If you want, put the actual countries, put the actual countries. Now what I want to be doing is I actually want to go ahead and use these countries to basically populate my recycler view. Let's see how we're going to do that. I'm going to go back to my onCreate. In here I'm going to go ahead and say I had an object called RV or my RV. So my RV. The very first thing that you have to decide about the recycler view is how does it look like. So I'm going to say layout manager of it. It becomes a linear layout manager. So there are two types of layout managers. One of them is linear, which is the one we're going to be using, which basically makes a table. The other one is something called a grid layout manager that you can use to make a grid of objects. That's basically having both rows and columns, something like the one that you see in the photo gallery application, for instance. So a grid of items. In this case, I care about the linear layout manager. And a linear layout manager basically wants to have a context, and I'm going to say the context is here basically. Then it becomes a matter of, so how do you want to take these countries and put them in your RV? And that's a question that is not as simple to answer, to be honest. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and say my RV is going to have an adapter, and then when you have an adapter, it says, well, you have to feed into me a recycler view adapter. And that's something that we actually have to write from scratch, something that we absolutely don't have. So that's basically the important part of this lesson, perhaps. So let me show you what we need to do about that. Let me get myself some space. I'm going to show you first the structure of it, then I'm going to write the one that we need. When you want to have an adapter, the adapter has to be basically subclassing the recycler view dot adapter. So I'm going to say have a class. That class, I'm going to call it simple adapter, for instance. And the simple adapter, I'm going to say it basically is borrowing or is subclassing the recycler view dot adapter. When you want to do that, then a recycler view adapter needs to have a view holder. Let me explain what is a view holder. A view holder is basically a kind of object that knows how to show a certain row. Basically, these rows that we created, we place them within a view holder. The view holder will have access to their, every component of them. In our case, just the text view, and then they basically adapt the members of this array to the objects we have over there. So basically for each of the text views that we have in our row, it finds one of these values and puts that value onto them. Now to do that, we basically need to have a view holder class. So I'm going to say class. I'm going to call this one simple view holder, and then the simple view holder is basically going to go ahead and again is going to be subclassing recycler view dot view holder. And then once we have that, it basically is going to give us that you have a recycler view holder. But the recycler view holders, they definitely need to have a view in them, which is their item view. They're basically asking us, so what is the item you're trying to feed into it? In here, for now, just for the matters of test, I'm going to put a private view. I'm going to say private val view of the type view, and I have to import this, of course. And I'm going to input this into there as well. So that becomes my simple view holder. And then now that I have that, I can actually feed this into my simple adapter. So I could go ahead and say that is the type of the object that I want to be using in here. And that is, however, not the end of it yet, because now we have this error, which basically is telling us you have to write some of the functions. Basically, you have to implement them. So I'm going to hit Alt and Enter, implement member. All three of these have to be implemented at all times. Now, let's talk about this for a quick second. What do they mean? The simplest of all is this one, get item count. Is basically saying when I'm trying to adapt, how many objects are there? So we somehow have to get access to this array, my countries. On your create a view holder, you basically you create a new view, and on your bind view holder, you basically decide what happens between the content that you have in your array and the object that you have as a row. Now, I know this is getting a bit overwhelming and a little bit extensive. Bear with me. I try to make it much simpler in the next round of this. This was an introduction as to how do we actually make our adapters and how do we actually make our basically view holders. Now let's go ahead and rewrite this whole thing for what we need to do. Let me show you what I mean by that. First thing I need is I need to have a class. Let's call it my adapter, simply because we need to have an adapter for my RV, my recycler view. And then my adapter is basically going to receive an array. What is that array? That array is this array of countries. So I'm going to go ahead and say right off the bat, my adapter does this. It has a private value of array, and that array is going to be an array of strings. So whenever we call this class adapter, is basically gonna, we have to feed an array of strings to it, which in my case is the array of countries. Then I'm going to go ahead and say this guy basically is a subclass of recycler dot adapter, very similar to what we had done before. And as you can notice, when I try to type the adapter, it automatically tells me that you have to feed the view holder class to me as well. I need to know who is the view holder of it. And I'm going to show you how we actually do this usually in developing Android applications. So here I'm actually going to leave this like that, and I'm going to open and close the body of the class, and then I'm going to write my class as an inline class. So I'm going to say class, and I'm going to call this one my view holder, and this is going to be the one that borrows from recycler view dot view holder, and then is going to ask me, so this view holder, what is it trying to hold? And I know the only object I'm trying to hold is a text view. So I'm going to go ahead and say my view holder basically has a value, let's call it text view, which is of the type text view, and then I'm going to use the same one here in my view holder. So that's about that. I have my view holder, and of course I can now use it in here in my adapter. So I'm going to go ahead and say use the object from my adapter dot my view holder. So basically this class at its definition is using something that is inside it. So this class is using my adapter dot my view holder, an object of its own within its own definition, or rather declaration. Now that I have this, almost everything is ready for me. I have feed the array into my adapter, I have made my view holder class, and I can now make those three functions that are going to basically build my adapter. So let's go ahead and say alt and enter in here, implement all the members. I'm going to get all three members in here, and let's get started with whichever is the easiest one. As I said, get item count is probably the simplest of these guys. So I'm going to go ahead and say for the get item count, just simply do this, say it is equivalent to the array dot size. So basically, what is the number of the items that we want to have is the number of the objects that we have in the array, and that's as simple as it can get. So I'm actually going to put this at the bottom, so that's the one that's already been taken care of. Now we have two other guys, the create view holder and the bind view holder. On the create view holder, this is basically where we get access to this object, and we have to decide about how do we actually attach it and where do we get it from, most notably. So let's first get that. I'm going to go ahead and say I have a value, let's call it text view. That value text view is going to become a layout inflator, and I will explain this in a second, from parent.context. That's the default way of doing it. Then I'm going to say inflate. What are we inflating? We are inflating this object, row item. I'm going to go ahead and say inflate r.layout.row item, and then I'm going to say in the inflate connect it to the parent, and then do not attach it. And then at the very end, I'm going to go ahead and say the object that you get at the row item, what kind is it? I know it is of the type text view, so I'm going to go ahead and say get it as text view, because we do know it is going to be a text view. Then I'm going to go ahead and say, well, this function, it has to return the view holder of the type my view holder. So apparently my view holder wants an argument of the type text view. So I'm going to go ahead and say value, let's call it new view holder, becomes my view holder of this text view. So the text view that we found is going to become that one, and then obviously at the end return new view holder. So whenever we call this function, or whenever this function gets called for each of the rows, it basically goes and finds this row item, gets it as a text view and attaches it in here and returns that one as a view holder for us. Now that we have that, we can do whatever we want to be doing on it. So basically, when you are trying to bind it, when you're trying to connect it to our recycler view, do this very simple thing. It's just going to be one line of code. It's going to be this holder. So the holder that you have already attached in here, get the text view from it. Why? Because we know it has a text view, and then from the text view get the text of it. So that's the text value of it. Make the text of it equivalent to wherever we are in the array. Where are we in the array? We are at the position. So that's kind of the index of the array. So I'm going to say position, and that's all we have to do. I know it's a little bit complex, but unfortunately it is what it is, and we will be doing a few more of this in the upcoming lessons, so hopefully it's going to be a lot clearer. For now, just keep in mind that when you want to have a recycler view, you have to have an adapter for it. The adapter of it has to be an adapter that in this case my adapter, and it's going to actually get the name of the countries or whatever you're trying to feed into your recycler view. In your recycler view, you need to have a view holder, which basically holds on to all the different objects of your row. In this case, my row only has one object of the type text view, so that's going to be simpler. You have to get the number of the items, which is rather simple, and then you have to decide what do you show on each of them. If you're wondering, why do I have to once create it and then once bind it? It's simply because of that whole nature of recycling. So if your recycler view has 20 items that it can show, it's going to basically make all 20 of those, but then as you scroll in it, they might need to have different content on them, and that's where the bind view holder basically comes into play. I'm going to keep this screen here for a second if anybody wants to try to catch up to me, and once you're done, what we want to be doing is we want to run our application, and hopefully it's going to show us what we expect to see. Let's see if it's actually going to do. This is the old application, so this is not the one. What we are doing is this application that's hopefully going to launch soon, unless I actually mistakenly shut it. So let's see what's going to happen. The application is actually running, so let me rerun it one more time. So here is that. So US, Mexico, Cuba, Jamaica, so on and so forth, and multiple copies of them. So every time only the ones that we can see are going to be allocated, and because of that it becomes rather performant. Now let's keep it up to here. I know this became a slightly longer lesson. Let's move on to our next lesson, where we learn how we can actually add a touch event to this very application, and I'll see you there.